Good afternoon and welcome to Prime Interest. I'm Perry Ann Boring.
And I'm Bob English.
And here's the stories that we're tracking today. The risk markets are up. Congratulations, Bernanke. While the Bank of England said they'd put QE on hold this morning, the S&P 500 edged over 1,700 today with the help of a key manufacturing report. According to Barron's, one of our key sources, they say, quote, "It's hard to understate the gains in this report." Unfortunately, construction spending collapsed by the largest amount in a year, missing expectations dramatically.
And mortgage rates, that would be the cost of buying a home, think constructions are up again, now just shy of 4.5%. The problem is, just 3 months ago, they were a full percentage point lower. And that was about the time Chairman Bernanke threatened to taper off his QE bond buying. Then there are all these funds that swooped in to buy cheap foreclosed houses and turned them into rental properties. Well, they are selling, as we've been reporting, vis-a-vis IPOs. In other words, they're dumping the inventory on the middle class. We can't have a bubble with that, right? And as Zero Hedge notes, American Homes for Rent just priced at a 44% discount versus its June prospectus offering, meaning rats, both small and New York-sized alike, are leaving the ship.
And there's new developments with the controversial Durbin Amendment, which we've coined as the swipe fight. A U.S. district judge kicked back the Federal Reserve's rule capping debit card swipe fees, saying they're still too high. The Durbin Amendment has saved merchants billions to date, which they're not passing on to consumers, and retailers are asking for even more. Meanwhile, banks are losing revenue and passing these costs on to debit card customers. More than likely, the Fed will appeal the court's decision. I'll break down interchange fees in detail in just a bit.
And I will discuss a number of recent global economic trends with Gerald Celente. Detroit, the Fed, Summers versus Yellen, well, you get the picture. And hopefully we will get a handle on the future.
And here's what's in your prime interest.
Channeling the Doc from Back to the Future, it's time to think fourth dimensionally. That means we're going to look into the crystal ball with the help of Gerald Celente, and he is the director of TrendsResearchInstitute. Gerald, thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you.
It's great to be with you. Well, munis are in the news. We have Detroit, and we have this prediction from Meredith Whitney a few years ago, which didn't come true in its day. Are we seeing the first domino right here with Detroit? Is it all about to fall?
Well, it's not all about to fall, and she's correct, I believe, in her assessment of all of these unfunded pensions, et cetera. But to us at the TrendsJournal, the fall of Detroit, the bankruptcy, is a metaphor for the entire United States. So let me explain. It's gone from Motown to no town. This was the country, you know, Henry Ford giving workers a working wage so they could buy automobiles. This then becomes the place where deindustrialization begins. And America starts sending its jobs to cheap labor markets, whether within the states and then overseas. And also, Bob, very importantly, it also became the blueprint for America's future in producing garbage from quality product. You know, I'm old enough to remember when automobiles were really great, and then they became really crummy. And that's when the Japanese and other marketers moved in to the United States. And then when you look at what's going on in Detroit now, in keeping the metaphor for the United States, it's a new form of austerity measures. Here's how it goes. We go bankrupt. We don't have money to pay the pensioners and the people that earn their money. But I'll tell you what we have money for. We're going to pay back those banks 75 cents on the dollar. How's that? So when you look at what's going on in Detroit and see what's going to be going on around the rest of the nation, where we're going to have these same problems, this is what you can look forward to. And one more word.
Yes.
Didn't President Obama say that Detroit wasn't going to go bankrupt?
Well, he might have said that. And I would add that Japanese, they do produce some good cars, but we have a key manufacturing statistic that came out today. It's the ISM manufacturing report, and it was 55.4. It beat consensus. So what are the relevance of these statistics to our economy right now?
Well, look at the one that came out of China, and that came out at 50.3, and it's just up from 50.1. And they're still weak. And I believe the ones from China, as many people do in the business, they're being rigged. And it's very important because if the United States doesn't buy and Europe doesn't buy, China doesn't make. And if China doesn't make, then Australia, Brazil, Canada, Bolivia, Chile, all these natural resource exporting countries, they don't sell their product. We're looking at a global slowdown. Everyone knows that when these QE2s stop, QE3s, and when interest rates go up, and they're going to have to go up, listening to your report about construction spending and mortgages, when interest rates go up, the economies go down. And the bubble in China, it was built the same way as this QE bubble has been built.
Well, China has certainly had some short-term funding problems. Their money markets have seized up, and it's very similar to what happened in the United States just prior to Lehman. So what is their exit strategy from all this? What is your prediction of this?
They don't have one. The same like here. How are they going to get out of the tapering? Once they start dumping $85 billion and buying up, bonds and government-backed securities, what are they going to do for an encore? How are they going to keep interest rates low? And you pointed out that the 30-year rate went up 100 basis points, and actually the quickest rise in 26 years.
Right.
So when in China, more than just a credit problem, they have a huge debt problem. And they have a huge balloon of a real estate bubble and other bubbles. So, and by the way, you know what China's greatest fear is?
What?
People. They're people. When you look at what the gross product is for the average person in China, it ranks like around Bangladesh and Iraq. So what you're going to see are hundreds of millions of angry people, and they're not going to be able to control them. This is a huge issue that doesn't make the media.
Okay, let's switch over to the U.S. and the Federal Reserve monetary policy. We have Bernanke. It looks like he's going for the exit doors. Is it going to be Summers, or is it going to be Yellen, or some other third party?
Well, of course, there are the people in the Democratic Party that want Yellen, and they want to put a woman in, particularly Pelosi and others. And then on the White House side, they want Larry Summers. Let's take a look at Larry Summers.
Let's.
You cannot mention Larry Summers' name without adding the word brilliant, either before, in the middle, or after. Every time this guy showed up when he was heading the Obama economic team, it was always the brilliant Larry Summers. What has the brilliant Larry Summers ever done that has turned the corner of the economy? Absolutely nothing. One failure on top of another. And one other thing about the brilliant Larry Summers. This is the same guy at the last end of the Clinton administration who pushed through the Glass-Steagall Act that deregulated the banks, that allowed them to become the casinos that gamble, that brought about the panic of '08. That's Larry Summers. And then you look at Yellen and go back to the Fed minutes that were released 5 years later, after, as they always do, they hold them back.
Right.
And she, along with the rest of them, every one of them called the panic of '08 wrong as it was evolving. So it's more of the same and worse.
Well, yeah, that's actually something we pointed out on yesterday's show, was that if you look at Yellen, she was simply cheerleading on this expansionary monetary policy during a real estate bubble. And then if you look at Summers, another thing we've highlighted is that he pretty much tanked the Harvard Endowment Fund. So could it be that there's going to be a third person that comes in here? Is this just like a PR campaign for the media to float various options here?
Whoever it is, it's going to be a member of the club. And it's not going to be much different than what exists. It's the same crew.
So let me ask you, what is the we have expectations of tapering at the end of the year now, maybe not. It seems like there's a new policy every day announced. What is your prediction of the length of QE going into, let's say, 2013 and 2014 even?
It's difficult to say, but what we do know is that interest rates are going to have to go up.
Yes.
And this global Ponzi scheme of printing digital money, not worth the paper it's not printed on, is going to happen. And when interest rates go up, the economy goes down. Period, paragraph. And it's in every country, it's the same thing. Again, look at retail sales. What's driving retail sales the most? One of the big items are automobiles. Tell you what, Bob,
sure.
We don't need any references, any references at all. We're going to give you a loan 0%. Doesn't that sound familiar, what they did with the real estate market? They're doing the same thing with the auto market, and that's a huge sector of society. So as the interest rates go up, the economy goes down. When will the interest rates go up on their own and the Fed won't be able to jack them down? Because after all, they say they're going to keep them at or near zero. I don't know.
It seems to be a paradox because they say they're going to taper. In other words, they're just going to take their monetary foot off the pedal, but at the same time, they're going to take down interest rates or keep them low into 2014, 2015 maybe. What is eventually going to drive interest rates higher?
I think you're going to see a debasement of the currencies. And that's why so many people still believe in gold, and I'm one of them. And so you're going to be able to debase the currencies only so much, and then they're going to have to do something to strengthen them. When that happens, then you're going to see interest rates go up.
Well, when you talk about debasement of the currency, what is the alternative to that? Are we going to return to a gold standard or a quasi-gold standard?
I believe that Celente, the former head of the
World Bank.
The World Bank, thank you. I think he came up with the best solution. And yes, gold part of a basket of currencies. So it's the yuan, the dollar, the euro, and gold or some other precious metal, maybe possibly silver. But I see a new world reserve currency in the future.
Okay, and let me ask you about this new world. Do you have any other predictions from your Trends newsletters that you can share with us here? And we have just about a minute left.
Our greatest concern is war, and the war in the Middle East. There's a civil war going on now in Egypt. They're not calling it that. I mean, after all, in the United States, they still don't call it a military coup.
Right.
I mean, how could anybody buy that BS line? And so it's not going to end. It's not going to be a happy ending. And you also have a civil war in Syria. You have one in Libya. You have one in Yemen and in Bahrain. They're not calling them that. That's what they are. As long as the United States, Israel, Iran, Lebanon, Russia, China, whatever, become involved in these conflicts, you're going to see these civil wars go to regional wars. That's our greatest fear.
So let me ask you, can you expand upon a regional war? How would that play out? Again, we only have about 30 seconds, but what would a regional war look like in the U.S. if the U.S. were involved?
Well, the U.S. supplying, of course, now the Syrian rebels, and we think the trigger point is going to be Israel. Israel already has bombed Syria twice, and they'll have another reason to do it, because now they're saying that they didn't get all their missiles the last time. So that's what we think is going to be the flashpoint. And when that flashpoint happens, then you're going to see other countries in the Middle East probably unite against Israel. That's
a very provocative statement, and unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you for joining me. This is Gerald Celente, director of the Trends Research Institute. And coming up, Perry Ann breaks down the Durbin Amendment. We promise it's not too wonkish. Retailers have been saving millions at the expense of big banks, but they're still crying foul. Yesterday, a federal judge handed down a ruling that could mean lower costs for retailers and customers alike. Then later, I duel political commentator Sam Sachs on fast foods and the ratings agency. So it turns out that they're turning more tricks. Stay tuned.
We are not talking the language of war, but I will only react to situations.
I have read the reports, but I'm not in a position to...
No, I will leave that to the State Department to comment on your latter point.
I don't want to say that.
Mr. Kerry, you have any comments on the document? No comment? Thank you.
No more weasel words. When you evade a direct question, be prepared for a chase. When you throw a punch, be ready for a battle.
Freedom of speech means little without the freedom to question.
Permission free. Accreditation free. Transport charges free. Arrangement free. Risk free. Stereotype free. Download free broadcast quality video for your media projects at freevideo.rt.com.
You know how sometimes you see a story and it seems so whole and complete, you think you understand it, and then you glimpse something else. You hear or see some other part of it and realize everything you thought you knew, you don't know? I'm Tom Hartman. Welcome to The Big Picture.
And the swipe fight continues between credit card companies and retailers over who should bear the brunt of the debit card swipe fee burden. On Wednesday, July 31st, a district judge shot down the Federal Reserve's rule on the Durbin Amendment, which capped swipe fees at 21 to 26 cents. The court said the cap was not draconian enough. The Durbin Amendment was a last-minute provision added to the Dodd-Frank financial reform law that drastically lowered swipe fees and took a bite out of banks' revenues. While we're discussing the case, let's break down interchange fees. They're also known as a swipe fee, and by definition, it is a fee charged to merchants when a customer pays with a credit or debit card. When a customer, for example, swipes their debit card at a retail store, there is a hidden fee assessed by the banks to process the transaction. The banks negotiate between each other, and the fee is charged to the merchant's bank. The swipe fight is contentious because it's a very lucrative industry. Interchange fees represent about $14 billion per year. Before implementation of the Durbin Amendment, swipe fees averaged 44 cents per transaction. The Fed capped those fees at 21 to 26 cents. The court, however, threw that rule out yesterday, and swipe fees will likely have to be lowered even further. The sponsor of the measure, Senator Durbin, said it would be good for consumers. He claimed credit card companies were being unfair and setting the price too high. This is how Senator Durbin explained it.
The average interchange fee was in the range of 40 cents per transaction. The actual cost, closer to 10 cents, maybe even less. They were charging 3 to 4 times as much over the cost of actually clearing the transaction to merchants and retailers across America.
The Durbin Amendment mandated debit card swipe fees to be reasonable and proportional to the cost incurred, and savings were to be passed on to consumers. Passage of the Durbin Amendment was a win for retailers. They have already seen $825 million in savings, according to the Electronic Payment Coalition. Retailers, however, are not contractually obligated to pass those savings on, and shoppers are actually paying on average 1.5% more. The Billing Gazette reported that retailers, that would be gas stations, are pocketing the money that was intended for consumers. On the other side of the equation are the banks who have lost revenue by having to slash swipe fees. These costs to the banks are being transferred to consumers in the form of reduced services and higher fees. According to Bankrate.com, significantly less banks are offering free checking, and more banks are charging higher fees, citing the Durbin Amendment as the cause. At yesterday's hearing, District Judge Richard Leon told the Federal Reserve that caps on debit swipe fees were still too high. John Berlau from the Competitive Enterprise Institute pointed out that should the Fed adopt Leon's interpretation, it will almost certainly result in more bank and credit union fees for consumers. But it's not all bad news. So while merchants and credit card companies are arguing over who pays what in swipe fees, the electronic payment system is quickly gaining market share over the antiquated banking system. There is a flood of new innovations emerging, including mobile payments, mobile wallets, virtual currencies, crowdfunding, and more that's changing the way we financially interact with one another. So if you're not sold by the Durbin Amendment, don't worry, it's not the end all. And now let's get to today's Daily Duel.
Guess who's back? It's Sam Sachs. He's here for the Daily Duel. And again, what's with the loosened tie? You're just too cool for school, aren't you?
Happy hour here. Hello, Bob.
It's almost happy hour.
Yeah.
About 10 minutes. All right, so first story. This week, hundreds of fast food workers are on strike protesting labor condition at the U.S.'s largest chains. So workers at McDonald's, Wendy's, and Burger King are demanding higher wages and the right to form unions. Your take?
I don't know. Should we pay workers poverty wages in America? Is that a great way to run an economy?
What are poverty wages?
Wages in which you can't get out of poverty if you're making that.
Okay, but who's actually working at these companies like McDonald's and Wendy's and what have you?
Yeah, I think the average age has jumped from 22 to 29. So we're not talking about young people here. We're talking about people who are raising families that are working at these restaurants.
I would say traditionally, minimum wage policy has been an ageist one. Unfortunately, it excludes people from the workforce because when you have businesses that only have they have to pay a certain wage, let's say it's $10 or $20 an hour, they're simply going to hire fewer people. But because of the economic situation that we're in, yes, people are actually working at McDonald's to support a family. Right. That's the larger problem.
Right. No, I'll give it to you that the Obama economy that's been created is one of low-wage jobs now, low-wage service sector jobs. That's the reality since we've devastated our manufacturing base and since we've relied on Wall Street to manufacture most of the wealth in the country right now.
If you can call it wealth.
Well, yeah, okay, manufacturing wealth.
On a nominal basis.
Counterfeiting wealth, I should say.
There you go.
But this is the reality we live in, is now we have all these workers who, they're not young workers anymore, they're older workers, they're working in the service sector industry. We need to be paying them enough so that they can then contribute to the economy. And look, we're talking about young brands, we're talking about corporations that are making enormous amounts of money, CEOs that are making enormous amounts of money, and studies that have shown that if you raise the pay of workers, that the price of food would go up a negligible amount, and that's something that we could all afford if we're making more money.
Unfortunately, that's a very, I would say, neoclassical, maybe post-Keynesian argument that we can
is that what you would call it?
Yes, that's exactly what I would call it. That you can just arbitrarily raise wages and then the economy magically recovers. Well, what you need to do is increase real wealth, and that comes down to productivity. We need to increase productivity. We need to.
Are you kidding me? Productivity has increased steadily since the 70s.
Steadily, and
the only thing that hasn't increased with it is wages. The only thing that hasn't increased with our productivity is wages, and basically all the fast food workers that are on strike and those who are advocating on their behalf are asking is that they get paid what they work for. If minimum wage kept up with what it was in the 1960s, they'd be making $15. And if it kept up with this productivity that you so demand, it'd be over $20 an hour they'd be making.
Let's
They're not
talk
even
about
asking
in the
for that much
1950s and 60s, a family of four could survive on one income. So there's a disparity there. Something has gone awry, and it has to do with the purchasing power of the U.S. dollar.
Something has gone awry. high, and our economy needs to adapt to it. But the bigger problem is wealth inequality and the fact that these corporations have the money, they can spare it, but they don't want to.
Okay, we're going to move on to our next topic now. Okay. Let's see here. According to a recent New York Times analysis, S&P has loosened credit rating standards in order to attract more business. The report states that S&P has routinely given higher ratings on new mortgage bonds when compared to other ratings agencies. This divergence became more apparent after S&P changed its bond rating criteria last September. And in a related story, Wall Street Journal News, JP Morgan's recent settlement over electricity manipulation charges brings total fines paid by the company to $7 billion, which is actually a paltry amount compared to their profits of $53 billion. And that's since 2011. So is Wall Street learning its lesson?
No.
Okay.
Well, no, I mean, this speaks to the point of psychopathy running rampant on Wall Street. S&P knows exactly what it's doing.
Well, they got sued by the government, so what are they just like taking their medicine and they've changed their strategy?
Well, as we said with JP Morgan, these companies take into account what their crimes will cost them, how much they might get sued, and they make a comparison of how much they make off it. It's like the side saddle airbags with General Motors, or fuel tanks with GM.
Sure.
They're making calculations on how much they're going to pay and how much revenue they get.
Yeah, but why do they do that? It's because the government allows them to do that. We have these veils of protection. We have the EPA. We have, all these regulatory agencies that give cover, but don't actually provide any protection for the investors or the consumers. So if we actually had a free market system in which these companies had to answer for their own actions, I would say we'd have a vastly different result.
Or if maybe these company CEOs were afraid that they might be thrown in jail when they're committing fraud.
I would agree with you there.
Rather than just having to write a check for whatever their company earns in 3 days.
Right.
There might be a little bit more action.
There's an interesting parallel here, because in Europe there's a private wealth management system, especially in Switzerland, where if you're managing somebody else's money and you screw up, in other words, you do fraud, basically you're on the hook for it.
Yeah, I mean, look, these people are short-sighted. They know exactly what's happening. They think that they're going to make their money, get out, be somewhere in the islands or something when it all falls down. And that was the calculation they made 2000 to 2007. Yes, we know we're building up a giant bubble. We know it's all going to crash, but I won't be a part of it when it happens. I'm getting my money and getting out. Fortunately, if everybody's thinking that way, that's going to set up quite a disaster.
I hate to tell you this, Sam, but you are going to be a part of it. And unfortunately, that's all the time we have today on today's Daily Duel. If you want to weigh in today's show, be sure to like us on Facebook at facebook.com/primeinterest. You can follow Sam here at Sam Sachs. You can follow me at English PI. Sam, thank you so much for joining me yet again.
Thank you, Bob.
And it was a day of status quo ante here at Prime Interest. The Bank of England said still let them eat bonds, and S&P was up marginally, but not too far from its decade-plus-old trading range. There was more jawboning at the Fed, boring, and Visa and MasterCard are in the middle of a swipe fight with Starbucks and 7-Eleven. Gerald Celente didn't hesitate to make a few dire predictions for our favorite reserve currency, to which we were somewhat privy. And our popularist dueler, Mr. Sachs, dug into the McDouble and the Slack S&P standards. No news is good news, except it isn't. Thanks for tuning in. Come back tomorrow. From everyone at Prime Interest, I'm Perry Ann Boring, and have a great night.